Welcome to Not in a Huff with Jackson Huff, where we interview newsmakers, storytellers, and all-around interesting people. Sit back, relax, unless you're driving, and enjoy the show. Here's Jackson.
Hello. I am Jackson Huff. This is Not in a Huff. Thanks for joining me. Appreciate it as always. Another great guest for you. Another one kind of in the series of learning about interesting professions that I know very little about. Experienced tattoo artist is what I'm speaking with today. World-renowned tattoo artist, Dan Henk. He's going to tell us all about what it was like getting into tattooing 22 years ago, what it's like now, how people even break into it, whether you go through this long process or whether it just takes being a good artist. Kind of some of these funny stories that he's gotten along the way, some crazy customers, what it was like kind of branching out and starting his own shop. Something that I really wanted to learn about was, obviously we all know, Ink Masters and LA Ink and Miami Ink, all these reality shows. How true are they to the real tattoo profession? On this podcast, we've talked to a lot of different people on reality TV, and we've seen that, TV has a way of making things just a little different than what they really are. Is that the case in these tattoo shows, or are they accurate? He's going to tell us a little bit about that, and then his overall thoughts on, on reality TV and the tattoo world. He's lived a very interesting life, from growing up kind of an army brat to getting stabbed to having brain cancer about 20 years ago. Just a fascinating life. He's done some really amazing things. I really enjoyed speaking with him. I think you're going to enjoy this. Whether you're like me and have zero tattoos and just want to kind of learn about the profession, or whether you're all tatted up and you just kind of want to hang out with a really cool guy, Dan Henk is definitely your guy there. And without further ado, here is Dan Henk. I'm here today with Dan Henk. Dan, how are you?
I'm good.
Good. Yeah. Well, thanks for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm excited to talk to you about things I know very little about. That's kind of why I have most people on the podcast. You're no different. But before we get to, your writing and then also your work as a tattoo artist, tell us a little bit about Dan Henk, in your own words, maybe pre-writing, pre-tattooing, just kind of you growing up.
Okay. I have military parents. I grew up in scattered army bases in little rural areas all over the place. Lived everywhere from New York to Germany to all over. And everything was like, we were not homeschooled, but it was like private Christian schools. So it was kind of learn at your own pace, do your own thing. A lot of just left alone to, read books, build tree forts, play with friends on BMX bikes and stuff. And so everything was going pretty good until about age 12 when I got into metal. And then my super Christian, super conservative parents didn't approve of that. And then went from metal into punk rock, which they thought was even worse. The whole time, at the time my dad was getting his doctorate, so we were in Gainesville, Florida. So there were that was the explosion of the indie comic boom. And like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles just came out, and then, obviously the first issue became worth a lot of money. So all these comic book shops, which were a new thing at the time. It used to be like just sold at like 7-Elevens and stuff. But all these comic shops started ordering a lot of indies, a lot of indie artists working at those comic shops, and I'd talk to them and I'd bring them my storyboards, and I thought that's what I could do. I was going to be a comic artist. So I was I'd just discount my parents and go to those shops instead. And I guess the more extreme that I looked, the more they started taking notice, and the more that, they sent me to a psychiatrist. I used to have to go to a psychiatrist twice a week, every week. They put my brother in a mental institution. It was like, if you ever heard that suicidal song, like Institutionalized, it's like all I wanted was a Pepsi and she wouldn't give it to me. That was my brother. He spent an entire summer in a mental institute just because we looked punk rock. So we did all that. They kicked me out of the house when I turned 18 and they moved. And I slowly climbed up from being homeless to having a job at Chuck E. Cheese to working 2 jobs and putting myself through community college for art. And then I moved to New York City to make it.
That's a brief synopsis where I'm sure there's a lot more to it. But yeah, I feel like I'm trying to kind of find any gleam of maybe good in all of that. And I feel like maybe you said that you were kind of an army brat. You moved around. Do you think kind of having that perspective of traveling and seeing, things outside of maybe one small town, it kind of helped you with your creative passions now, just to kind of have that diversification when you were a kid?
I think that helped, but I think the thing that helped the most is just the isolation and being left alone to be an individual. You could read what you wanted, you could explore what you wanted, you could do what you wanted. And my parents didn't really care. Like, as long as I was reading, and I read a lot. We didn't even have TV until I was in 5th grade. But I read a lot, and as long as I was reading, they liked it. So they thought I must be on a good path. They have no idea what you can read, but...
Yeah, and I know you talked quickly here or there about going to college for illustration. So what was, I think it sounds like you maybe wanted to get into comic books. Were you wanting to, is that right? Or were you always thinking about this tattoo world, or what was your initial thoughts when you were going for illustration?
Well, initially it wasn't tattooing at all. It was because my only exposure to tattooing, and keep in mind I was in like small, rural areas, like living on army bases. So I'd see like Mike Ness from Social Distortion on TV, and they'd all be covered in tattoos, but they'd be like those old school traditional tattoos. I was like, that's not really where I want to go with my art. I mean, that stuff's cool. I want to get a lot of those, but that's not where I want to go. So at the time, like, I couldn't decide whether I wanted to be a writer or artist, because living on your own and reading a lot of books and stuff, I had this crazy imagination, and I have all these stories I wanted to tell. I was like, well, if I just draw them but I don't write them, I'm not really telling a story. And if I just speak it, I have all this visual stuff that I'm not getting across. And I think it was the first comics I saw, like Watchmen and Dark Knight, where they had more adult, well-written, stories and the artwork. And the combination of the two impressed me. And that's when I said, hey, I will do that. That's perfect. That's everything I want. And it took a move to New York City to realize it's not so easy to do it as you think. It's not even a matter of whether you're talented at it. It's a matter of getting them to trust you to do several things at once. It's a matter of they don't want to pay you anything at all. Meantime, I started tattooing, thinking, rent, and then eventually I'll do something that, eventually I'll do something more art related. And I like tattooing so much that I stuck with it. I found out I could express myself artistically with that. Not only that, but it also gave me a little bit of financial backup, so I could do illustrations and I could do writing on the side.
So, I mean, it makes sense of why you kind of took that transition to tattooing. But the thing I've always wondered is, how do people get into that, other than maybe, is it most people just coming from, other art forms and deciding to do that? Or is there a lot of tattooing schools? Or I feel like a lot of people I see are like doing like an apprenticeship under somebody else. But I just wonder how somebody makes that transition from never being a tattoo artist to now going and doing that. I don't know what the process is.
Well, it's changed a lot over time. Like when I first got into it, I lived in Northern Virginia right next to DC, and I worked in DC. And in Northern Virginia, there were no tattoo shops. You had to either go all the way down to Richmond, or you had to go to Maryland. Like, I got my first tattoo in Silver Spring, Maryland, at a place called Fatty's Tattoos. And back in those days, it was more of a really closed society. So it's more of like, hey, do you know the right people? Did you say the right words? It's like, it was less about what you could do artistically and more about if you made the right impression with an artist. And then, you were really privileged if he taught you. Like, some people would pay crazy money. They wouldn't even touch a tattoo machine for 3 years. They just be like an intern for the shop, like doing all the cleaning, all the management, everything. Nowadays, it's not really like that. You have a lot of people there. Like, tattoos got a lot bigger with like the whole Ink Masters and Miami Ink and all the social media, and they say that I think 80 something percent of people under 35 are tattooed. And because it got so much bigger, there was obviously a lot more demand, and people were saying on the shows that hey, you could do a lot more than what people originally thought tattoos were, like the more tribal and Americana based like traditional tattoos. And now, if you're a good artist, there's a lot of people that are willing to take a chance on you, and they'll get you tattooing a lot faster than like the old school ways. Is kind of like if you look at like those old like military build ups where like they put you through all sorts of stuff. They would kind of emulate that with the tattoo world, and in a way they'd almost overdo it, like because it was like, oh, we're on a pedestal, and you're so privileged that we're just taking the time to teach you that they would make you go through. They basically make you go through hell to like weed out the people that couldn't hack it. And now it's if you're a good artist, people look at it differently.
Yeah. So when did you kind of come through the world? Was it in the old school time, or was it just a little bit easier for you?
It was a little bit easier for me, but it was still. I mean, it was those old school days. And I had a friend of my brother's who's a tattoo artist, and he saw my paintings. He's like, that guy should tattoo. And he offered to teach me tattoo. And at first I was like kind of on the fence about it because I was still really trying to make it as a comic artist. And I interviewed with Penguin Books, I interviewed with DC Comics. DC Comics only wanted me to draw superheroes. I didn't want to do that. And they're like, oh, we don't have a job for you then. And so he apprenticed me. He taught me how to tattoo. His name was Chad Divil. He worked at the time at Visual Diction in Carlisle, PA. When my parents moved back to the States, that's where the station. So my brother was there. He was good friends with this guy, Chad Divil. He showed Chad my work. So that's how the connection was made. And I'd go there, and he got me my first set of inks, and he got me my first tattoo machines, and taught me a lot of the old school stuff. But in those days, people were really, you had a lot of haters. People were really hardcore about a lot of stuff. So it's like, oh, well, you didn't have an apprenticeship with a guy where you sat in his shop for 3 years straight, so that's not considered a real apprenticeship. And like, people wouldn't even look at the quality of your work. It was more, you had to, dot every I and cross every T, and like, if it wasn't perfect, they didn't care how good your work looked. And I remember, people were fighting over everything back in those days. Like, if your shop sold, T-shirts or sold anything besides just tattooing, they would say you're not a real shop. They'd actually have people with flyers outside your shop handing out flyers saying real shops don't do this. So yeah, it was full on hatery in those days. You had people, if they opened a shop too close to you, they would throw a Molotov cocktail through your window and burn your shop down.
Oh my goodness. So yeah, it was the Wild West for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that you kind of alluded to it. You came from kind of the drawing on paper world. I just wonder, how well does that lend itself to tattooing? Does people who, are good artists, does that make them generally, if they take the time, a good tattoo artist? Like, what's that transition from paper to skin? Because I feel like that would be quite a big leap.
Well, it can. It doesn't necessarily, but the thing is, like back in the old school days, a lot of people, they learned how to draw when they learned how to tattoo. And a lot of their drawing was kind of mediocre and more based on what worked as a tattoo. And then you had this influx of people that, they went to art school, they were really good artists, and they're trying to be tattoo artists. But some of that stuff doesn't hold up very well on skin, especially over time. Because tattoos, they blur a little bit over time. The skin isn't a flat surface. Maybe you grow some skin hair, you get a tan. So there's a lot of stuff that you have to look into, that people do look into now. But at the time, it was like every new thing. It was like, how's this going to work out? Because people weren't really used to that.
Kind of maybe fast forward quite a bit. Let's talk about your current tattoo shop, and then also, you talked about people burning down tattoo shops. I don't know whether it was just a coincidence that your last shop burnt down, or if there's something sinister happening. But talk a little bit about that too. I got you.
I mean, the place next to us was a restaurant, and the building owner had done a really bad job. Like, he didn't build a firewall in between us. He had a wall that didn't go all the way to the ceiling, and the fire started in the restaurant and hopped over the wall and burned us down. So it was more like bad property management than anything dealing with tattooing. But back in the day, I mean, a lot of shops, they'd be run by motorcycle gangs. If you left the shop, they would track you down and break your hands with a hammer so you could never tattoo again. It was pretty hardcore in the old days.
I would say so. Well, I'm glad that I'm not glad your shop burnt down, but I'm glad that it wasn't for maybe some of these more tough reasons. It just a restaurant. But let's talk about your current shop. I think you have a partner too, but talk a little bit about, creating your own shop, because that's obviously another leap. We talked about your leap from being an artist to being, somebody who does art on skin, now to actually being a business manager, business owner. Talk a little bit about that transition.
Well, I didn't want to be a business owner. Like, I've been tattooing 20 years, and I've done guest spots, and there are people that have been tattooing even longer than me. And I'd be talking with them. They're like, yeah, it's so much trouble owning a shop. And also, back in the old school days when things was tougher, it was also tougher to be a business owner because you didn't have as much clientele. Everything was a little bit harder. But I was like pretty settled on, I'll just be the artist. I don't want to deal with all the payroll and licensing fees and all that sort of stuff. And one of the last shops I worked at, it had some really good artists there. But the guy who owned the shop, who was also a really good artist, just started, I guess he figured he was making so much money off of us, he didn't really have to put anything into the shop. So when he lured me into the shop, he was saying, oh, we're about to start a website, we're about to this. He never did any of that. And then, like, we run out of supplies, they call him up, he's like, oh, you buy that now. It's like, well, thanks for telling me the minute I have a customer in the chair, But we basically learned how to run our shop by how badly that shop was run. And me and Paul were both working there, and we're like, let's just open our own shop. We know what not to do. And we're both kind of mellow guys. We're not going to be like hard asses down people, breathing down people's necks, trying to make them, fit into some mold or whatever. So we're like, as long as you show up and do good artwork, that's all we care about.
So now as a business owner, how do you find good tattoo artists? I know, I've talked to people in a lot of other worlds where maybe they're doing an audition and things like that. What does it look like to staff a shop? Because obviously it's not just an easy interview. Is it a portfolio? What's that look like?
Well, it's in the old school days, it's changed a little bit. In the old school days, it used to be you'd go in with the portfolio. A lot of shops would say, all right, what shop did you work at previously? Then they call that shop to double check on you, and then they'd give you a few days to work there, and they'd stand over you watching you tattoo. Now it's a little bit different. Like, nobody really calls your old shop. I mean, that happens a little bit, but it's not a priority like it used to be. It's more like what we do is, we talk to somebody. If he was at another shop previously, we might contact that shop and, see what their impression of him was. And then we invite them to do a guest spot. And we say, let's see if we're comfortable with you. Let's see if you're comfortable with us. And then he'll do the guest spot. And, we try not to, micromanage and stand over his tattooing work and make things hard on him. But, we will occasionally stop by and oh, hey, man, what are you working on? Take a look at it and kind of get a feel for him, get a feel for his personality, what his artwork looks like. I remember one of the guys that we hired recently, I said, exactly that. I was like, do a guest spot. The first day he did one tattoo, it really didn't impress us. And I was not going to hire him based off that. The second day, he brought somebody in, he did a tattoo, we're like, wow, he's really good. And then we hired him based off that. So that's kind of the process, kind of a softer feeling people out.
Yeah, and I guess that's the weird part to me with it, I don't have any tattoos, but I know obviously it's a very permanent thing. So you say, one day you did a tattoo that didn't necessarily impress you, but the next one was I always think, well, that first day that maybe was, an off day, that's still a permanent tattoo. I don't know. That just kind of scares me a little bit, because obviously if you're having an off day, that's a permanent thing on somebody's skin.
Well, it's not that he did a bad tattoo. It's just, it was a smaller tattoo. It was a simpler tattoo. It wasn't. I mean, we kind of consider ourselves a higher end studio, so we were really good artists working there, and we're like, the tattoo we did, we're like, well, that would fly for a lot of shops that are just walk-in shops, but we really want to see that you have artistic potential. And we didn't really see that with the first one, but like I said, it wasn't a giant, heavily detailed tattoo. It was an older client, and the older client wanted something more simple, which I understand, but that doesn't show us your ability. For instance, if you applied for an artistic job for comic books, and you did one little tiny illustration, but you're capable of a full-on splash page, but you only did the illustration, so we're like, we don't see what your potential is. So we saw the potential with the second one, and we're like, it was a sleeve, about 3/4 of it was already done, it was healed up, and he added onto that sleeve, and we're like, well, the sleeve looks beautiful, healed up. What he added onto it looks amazing, so we should definitely hire him.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I just wonder too, you talked about being a high-end shop. How much of the world of tattooing, how much of, your shop is it that less, walk in? Obviously, when you're worried about, people's quality, it matters on people that's just walking in, and, the name on your hat, the shop matters more than the actual tattoo artist. How much of the world now is people that already kind of have their, maybe even social media, but their clientele built up where, you're hiring them basically just to give them a seat, and they really have their own clientele. They're just bringing into the shop and tattooing. It doesn't really matter where they're at. I don't know whether that's really a thing or not, but I feel like with social media, it's almost the artist now rather than the shop.
No, it really is. I remember back in the day, because there was a lot less social media, so it was like, a shop would get a magazine spread. A shop would have, a website. When websites came around, I remember before websites were even really a thing. A shop would do conventions. It would be the whole shop, and there might be 5 artists, and they'd all have a banner from that shop. Like you mentioned the shop. And so you're right, the focus has transitioned more towards the artist as opposed to the shop. And anyone that we hire, we tend to hire people that already have a clientele. Anybody good has a clientele. You do have shops that are more like the walk-in shops, like the We Do Anything shops. And if you go to a major city, you kind of have both. If you go to a more rural location, you often have a walk-in shop. Usually what will happen too is, because tattooing has gotten so popular, is you might have 5 shops in a smaller town, or 4 shops in a smaller town. And out of those shops, one will be really good. Other really good is kind of subjective, because really good for the area, they're a big fish in a small pond, But the one will be really big, really good, and one will just kind of do anything and, feed the demand.
This may be a harder question just to kind of put you on the spot for, but what's some things that might surprise people about tattooing, or what's some misconceptions people have about the industry that you can kind of dispel?
Well, I think one of the biggest, there are 2 things that are, horrible, like Ink Master, Miami Ink, kind of cliches that really are not true, and they bug everyone in the tattoo industry. One is that if you're an ink master, you can do everything well. It's like, okay, let's take this to the medical profession for a minute. Like if you go to a local clinic and they can treat everything, they're probably not the guy to do brain surgery on you. The guy who does brain surgery is probably not the guy to treat your kidneys. The guy who does heart surgery is probably not the guy to do brain surgery. So it's like, if you're really good at something, you often specialize. And you put all your focus on that, because it's way too big and diverse for somebody to be amazing at everything. So if you take like Japanese is really big, and my preference is Japanese is based more on Japanese art. Like their watercolor style looks very distinctive, and you have a lot of people that they're really good technical tattoo artists, but they don't capture the look of Japanese artwork. And the ones who are very good technically and capture the look of Japanese artwork might not be the person who could do amazing biomech, sort of flesh and machinery sleeves on you. So the guy who can do that, though, also probably can't do the amazing Japanese base piece. So find a specialist. That's the big thing. A lot of people think that if you can do everything, you're amazing. No. The other thing is people think that there's another thing that they get from the TV shows. They can go in with the big piece and they'll get it right on the spot. No, if you have a big piece, you go in for a consultation, and the person kind of draws it up and shoots some sketches by you and comes up with the final product. It's not a quick and easy, sit down in the chair and we'll get your back piece done.
No, that makes sense. And that kind of leads back to the an earlier question. It definitely makes sense to me that, people are going to specialize when they're good at one thing or just a few things. How important is it when running a shop to have, a very diverse group of artists? Do you ever like, oh, you're really good at, Japanese artwork, but we've already got two people that are like that. Now we need somebody else in the shop that's good at something else just for that walk-in clientele. I don't know if you even have that, but is it important to have people that are good in all these different areas, or given that people kind of come for the artist, it doesn't necessarily matter that much anymore?
Well, the whole tattoo community has evolved so much that that's not even really as much of a thing anymore. Like it used to be, if you were the big, amazing, talked about shop in the area, you had people who could handle almost everything. Now it's like, well, this shop specializes in this. You can go to this shop down the street that specializes in that. And a really good shop will refer you to somebody else. They'll go, hey man, that's really not my thing. This is a shop you should go to. And then the other shop will do the exact same thing back for you. So if I'm like, like I specialize in like realistic horror. So if I do realistic horror, and I've had people come to me say, hey man, I want to get this, and they'll mention a bunch of Japanese elements. I'm like, that's not really what I specialize in. Let me send you to somebody who can do it better. They're like, oh man, I love your tattoos. I'm like, yeah, you love my tattoos that are realistic horror. You don't love my Japanese tattoos because you've never seen them. But I will tell you who you should go to. And I've had people that specialize in something else, and people come to them for something I specialize in, and they'll say, hey, you should go to Dan Henk for it. So it works both ways.
I like that. I like that you guys have went from, I guess, breaking each other's hands when you try to leave the shop to now referring each other. It sounds like everyone's mellowing out a bit, huh?
It is, and you get some people with that kind of more old school attitude, but more and more they get ostracized from the community if they do that. Like you even have people that kind of back in the day, they were the rock stars, and the ones that still stay relevant are the ones that kind of soften their approach and have a nicer attitude and like, yeah, I'm the veteran and I want to help you learn and help you get better.
Yeah. So what if someone's listening, let's say they're, a young artist, whether they're tattoo or something else, beyond just having quality work, what advice do you give to people to, I guess, set yourself apart? Because obviously social media is a crazy world. Obviously that's an easy way to get your stuff out there, but it's also oversaturated. So how do you, what do you tell people that maybe want to set themselves apart?
Well, I think it's more what people do this wrong than telling people what they should do this right. Sure. So what they do this wrong is they say, some people go to the extreme when they go, I definitely don't want to be influenced by anybody. I want to be my own thing. It's like, well, when you first start out, you should be influenced by people. Look at the people whose work you really like and see what they do that produces that. And then you can develop their own style. Once you know all the basics and once you have the solid grounding, then you can expand outwards. The other people that they try and copy stuff exactly. They're like, okay, this person does it, I'm going to do it. Like, they're popular, they have a lot of fans, a lot of people like their work, I'm going to do an exact copy of it. And that's not good either. So you kind of have to ride the line. And I think good artists do that.
Next question, I feel like you probably get all the time. And honestly, with given that your specialization, you make some very interesting tattoos. So I don't know whether this even works for you, but sure every tattoo artist gets asked, what's the craziest thing people have asked you to tattoo or the craziest locations? Any interesting stories there?
I have probably more than we have time to go over. When almost everybody when they start out, there are a couple people that start out at like really exclusive shops and only do custom artwork, but a lot of people when they start out work at kind of flash walk-in shops, and all my best stories are from flash walk-in shops. I could go on forever. I remember there's one person I was tattooing an angel on them. We had a set of flash called Cherry Creek Flash that back in the day everybody had. If they had good flash, they had Cherry Creek. And so I was tattooing an angel off Cherry Creek, and the guy kept disappearing in the bathroom and coming out. He was rubbing cocaine in the tattoo, which kind of numbs the skin, but it makes it heal horribly. So, he did it a couple times, and then I caught him on it. I was like, hey, what are you doing? I was like, you're ruining your tattoo. I'm not going to do this. So I kicked him out. I remember there was another guy that came in. He wanted a bulldog tattooed on his chest. And I was like, okay. And he was a big guy. He was like 250 pounds, solid muscle. I think he was ex-Marine. And so he wanted a bulldog tattooed on his chest. I said, okay. So I started drawing it up. He leaves, gets a bottle of vodka, comes back with almost the entire bottle polished off. And so I'm debating whether, if you have that much alcohol in your system, it's not that good. But he was already kind of getting a little antagonistic, and the shop owner's like, Dan, just bang it out as fast as you can. Bang it out. So I started on him, and while I'm tattooing him, he starts barking like a dog. He's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And I'm like, and I stop. He's like, you got to get into it. You got to get into it when you tattoo. All right, so I keep tattooing after a little while. Yeah, I have more stories like this. I could go on forever. I've been tattooing 22 years. But, yeah, back in the days, it was a little bit different.
I can only imagine those early days where you're having to do the more walk-in things. That's probably where the interesting clients came from. So, yeah, I can only imagine you've got quite a few stories. But let's kind of move on to something else you mentioned, and that is, I guess, the tattooing coming more into the mainstream with all these reality shows. And I've talked to a lot of people where their profession is now turned into a kind of a reality show phenomenon, and there's always goods to it, and then there's always a lot of bads too. So how do you feel about the Ink Masters and LA Ink and all that kind of stuff? Has it helped, or has it hurt, or is it kind of in the middle, or what? I guess what are your thoughts there?
I think that it has helped, which is probably a controversial opinion, but I think it has helped, and that it's just made tattooing more mainstream and more popular, and you're getting people that are even better artists in it. You're getting people that went to art school and they get out and they realize, hey, this could pay my bills. This is a good venue to go into, and they'll go into it. The way it's hurt is it's giving people bad impressions on what can be done with the tattoo and how it can be done. Like, one thing that really bothers me too, aside from the two I already mentioned, is people will do cover-ups and they'll take a picture and people are like, oh, you can do this cover-up with all these light colors over dark colors. And yeah, that works for the camera, but that top layer of skin that you deposit ink in dies, peels off, and the second layer underneath it actually has the old tattoo and the new ink that you put in the skin. And once that top layer peels off, the cover-up is now nowhere near as comprehensive. So it's, there's a big fight between, what you do and what's going to hold up over time. I mean, you also have tattoos that they look good for like 5 months or 6 months, but a year down the road they're going to look horrible, like when people get lettering too small and so on. Like, it just bleeds down the skin and looks like a blur over time. You get people also that, they'll take a picture and then they go in Photoshop and they make it look amazing and they post it, and people are like, oh wow, that's what tattoos look like. You're like, tattoos do not look like that.
Even though obviously it's a permanent thing for people, again, kind of back to that permanent thing, I guess the reality world is like every other reality show, and it's really kind of there for the camera there, and they maybe don't care as much about what happens when the camera's off.
Right. I think probably the best advice is go look at people's portfolios. If you know somebody's been tattooed by a local person, look at the tattoo that's on them, and what you want to see in portfolios, you want to see healed work. You don't want to see work that's just done and they took a picture of it and it's a fresh tattoo that's not really going to capture what it looks like over time and how it holds up. So, like, there's a Instagram site called I think it's called Freshly Healed, and it shows you what the tattoo looked like when they first took a photo of it and what it looks like now, and it's kind of an eye opener.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I want to ask you one more story that I read about with you. I don't know where it fits in your timeline, if it's even a tattooing story, but you mentioned getting stabbed by somebody. What happened there?
That's before I was a tattoo artist. I lived in D.C. That was Marion Barry years when crime was really bad, and I remember even like the mediocre communities would have a gate around them because it was so dangerous. They had to keep people out. And it was my girlfriend at the time and her sister moved to live with us from the suburbs. And she walked her fluffy white dog around the block at 12 at night, and a crackhead came up and forced her to take them inside the house. And it ended up with a knife fight between me and the crackhead. And then he severed the tendon on my thumb. He tried to stab me a bunch of times. I have a jacket with all these holes right around the chest. And I finally got the knife from him, and I tried to stab him, but he was too fast. Like, I was wearing big boots, and I was trying to chase him. And we called the police, and the police could really care less. They had a station right down the street, but it took them 45 minutes to get there. And they called from across the street to make sure he was still there. So D.C. was really bad in those years.
Well, I guess fast forward, I'm glad that your thumb healed nicely, because I feel like that would have been a bad thing for you as a tattoo artist if your thumb was jacked up.
Well, it was my left hand, so my right hand is what I tattoo with.
Well, good. All right. One more question about tattooing before we get to your books, and that is another thing which may just be a TV thing, but something I always think, man, that looks like that. I don't think I could ever do that. Have you ever tattooed yourself?
Yeah, I did. Most tattoo artists have tattooed themselves at one point or another. I tattooed most of my left arm, and it's pretty difficult. Like, spraying the skin, I'd be like, trying to squeeze it between my legs, or have my girlfriend hold it. And at the time, I figured my artwork was a lot more advanced than my tattooing, and I was desperate to show people that I could do more because I was just getting little tiny tattoos. So I did most of my left arm myself.
Oh my goodness! Well, that's I've seen people do little bitty things on their leg, but a full almost sleeve on their arm, that's a whole nother level.
Well, when I get into something, I get into it hardcore, so I tend to go overboard. But most people have tattooed themselves, and a lot of people, when they apprentice, they'll do a small tattoo on the leg or something.
Yeah, so let's talk about something else you got into, and that is writing. What made you decide to start writing books? Obviously, you're a creative guy. That's evident given your work in illustration and then in tattooing. But what made you decide, hey, I want to start putting some words on paper too?
Well, I wrote my first book when I was in 5th grade. I mean, I'm sure it's horrible if you read it now, but I had the writing bug because I like to tell stories. That's what it's all about. Huh? And I told you I couldn't decide whether I wanted to do art or I wanted to do writing because both tell a story, but both kind of need each other to tell the story. And first I was into comic books. I was like, that's going to do it. And then, I decided, maybe interviewing with them and the practicality of it, of creating that much artwork to tell that much story. It's a very long process. And I decided that probably what's best is illustrated books, books with a number of illustrations in them, so I could get across the visual aspect with the illustrations, and I'd have more words to tell a more complex story. So yeah. That's kind of what I got to. I kind of after the whole comic book thing, and I was interviewing with Tor Books and Penguin Books, and I decided I wanted to do that. I started doing all that. I came down with brain cancer. My life got very chaotic because I was moving around all the time. I was newly married. Then I had like my 15 minutes of fame where I was like in all the tattoo magazines and stuff. And then I remember what really lit a fire on my ass is there was a British horror writer named Wayne Simmons, and he wrote a zombie book, and one of the main characters was a tattoo artist. And at the time, like I said, I was in all the magazines, so he was like, oh, this is a guy to ask. So, he asked me to read it, give him my opinion on his portrayal of a tattoo artist. I said, well, there's a lot of change. So I told him, he listened to me, and then that kind of gave me the bug to, hey, I really got to do this again.
Yeah, well, I want to take a quick break on your writing. I don't want to just gloss over the part with brain cancer. I didn't mention much of that because obviously that would be a lot to unpack, but just kind of tell us what happened there and hopefully a good spot that you're at now.
Well, I was doing a lot of artwork, and I just been tattooed. I was tattooing 2 years, which they evolve faster as tattoo artists now than they did back then. I feel like they do, at least. But I've been tattooing for 2 years, and I felt I just started to get my stride as a tattoo artist. But I was painting covers for books, and I was doing a lot of art for bands and stuff like that. And I started getting headaches. And I remember I went to one clinic, and at the time I barely made any money. And, I just started tattooing. So I went to a cheap local clinic. I went to get the prescription filled at the pharmacy. They couldn't read the handwriting that called the clinic. The clinic wouldn't even answer. I went to another clinic that was a lot more expensive. They said you're dehydrated. They pumped me full of saline solution. They said, if you feel worse tomorrow, give us a call. And the next day I was like throwing up, and my girlfriend was calling and calling. And when they finally came into the clinic, they're like, go to the hospital. So I went to the hospital. I told them the same thing again. They said, oh, you're a brain bleed. You probably got kicked or punched in the head. Put me in a CAT scan. They go, oh, wait, it's cancer.
So what happened there?
Well, they said it was a slow-growing tumor. Who knows how long I'd had it, but because the inside was all dead tissue, necrotic tissue, once it burst open, I'd be dead. So I probably had about 2 weeks. But it had gotten big enough that it was giving me headaches because there was tension against my brain. And they're like, we have to operate right away. So they did a couple MRIs, like with contrast and everything. And then they operated on me. And unless we're living in the Matrix, I'm still here. And after that, they ran a pathology on it to see whether it's cancerous, or not. It was. So they talked to me about chemo. They talked to me about radiation. I did both because it's more successful when you do the two together. And then it's a long road to recovery. I think it took about 5 years, for me to recover. But I'm stubborn, so I was like, I refuse to give up. So I was still like trying to work on paintings on the side, still tattooing 3 days a week, still going to the gym a couple days a week.
So, I mean, you said that happened when you were tattooing for 2 years, took 5 years to recover. You've been tattooing for 20 years, so I assume you're in a good spot now.
Yeah.
So it's nothing's came back and you're cancer free, correct?
Well, yeah. So far I'm cancer free, and they say after 5 years you're considered. They say it's cured, but it's not like you absolutely won't get cancer. You probably have about the same chance as everyone else.
Right.
So I did MRIs for about 6 years, and after that I stopped doing MRIs entirely because those old school MRI machines, they're little. You're like a bullet shoved inside a cartridge. You're like this, little person shoveled way deep inside, and they keep you there for like an hour with like powerful magnets flipping around your head, and it made me claustrophobic. So I hate hospitals. I hate MRI machines. So I don't go anymore. But I went for 6 years, and it didn't come back within 6 years.
Well, good. I'm glad to hear that for sure. So let's get back to the books. I definitely didn't want to just gloss over that fact at all. Tell us, I guess, I know you've written a few books. It's going to be kind of up to you. I want to kind of know what your books are about, the genre, maybe a synopsis. You can tell us just about this newest book, if that's what you want. You can kind of give us a highlight of all of them, but just kind of tell us a little bit about what people are going to be reading if they pick up one of your books.
Well, it's apocalyptic, dark sci-fi, which is kind of the stuff I'm into. Like I was really into watching Outer Limits and Twilight Zone. I mean, after we got a TV, we didn't get TV till 5th grade, but when we got it, my parents would only let us watch an hour a day, and that's started to watch. So that always impressed me way more than like, slasher flicks or, like incidental kind of like cliched stories. I liked it when it was really interesting, like weird creatures, strange situations. So I try and keep that going with my books. And I try to make it complex enough that there's enough going on it doesn't seem like it's the same thing, but I also try and make it based enough on reality. Like every book I do a lot of research on. Like right now I'm writing about alien invasion, so I have a whole stack of books that I'm reading up on ways that insurgents fight a larger military and so on. But I kind of kept this idea from comic books where everything happens in the same continuity. So all of my books, they kind of relate to each other. They're all in the same world. But I also don't like it where you have to read one to read the other. So I try and keep them kind of loosely connected.
I gotcha. Yeah, and I mean, this may be another tough question that you don't want to pick. But what do you feel like you enjoy more? If someone said you're going to be super successful, but you got to pick tattooing or you got to pick writing, which one do you think you would gravitate towards more, or you just say I don't want to answer that?
Well, I don't think that's going to happen. But if I had an ideal world, which is probably a better answer,
yeah.
If I had an ideal world, I would draw, I would write, and I would tattoo. I would just like it would almost be like split into thirds.
I gotcha. Well, very good. Well, I'm glad you're doing everything that you're doing. You love enough to want to kind of split it up. So how can people find these books, and then tell us the names of them too, if you would.
Yeah, my first book is The Black Seas of Infinity, and second book, which is kind of a collection of short stories. Like after I wrote that first book, and I was searching around for publishers, I kept writing, and so I had a whole collection of short stories, some of which have been published. I pulled them all together, and I wrote a novella, and it was my second book. And then I wrote my third book. It's called The End of the World, and it's a sequel to the first book with some of the characters from my second book in it. But it's kind of like Road Warrior to Mad Max. Like you don't have to read one to understand the other one.
I gotcha. Where are people going to find these books?
They're on Amazon. Probably everything's available on Amazon these days. But you can find them on Amazon. You can find it on Audible.com. You can find it in Barnes & Nobles, Kobo. Pretty much every major site has it.
So yeah, definitely. People that are interested in that genre, check it out for sure. How can people, kind of wrapping things up, how can people connect with you as a whole? I know you have a website. Let's give all your connection points. I don't know, we didn't mention like the name of your shop. I'm sure you're well booked out, but people just wanting to connect with you, whether it's your books, you as a person, your tattooing, kind of just give those connections.
Well, everything is on my website. So if you go to danhenk.com, you'll see everything. You'll see I put all my art projects, put all my writing, I put videos, everything's on there. My website for the shop is The Abyss Fine Art. It's called The Abyss. That's the name of the shop, and it's in Long Beach, New York. And I'm also on Instagram. I'm Dead Guy LLC on Instagram. I used to have Dan Henk, and then somebody hacked into it from Russia, so I had to start a brand new site. So it's called Dead Guy LLC. I'm on Facebook. I'm on TikTok. If you're an artist, you pretty much have to be on all the social media just to get your name out there.
I got you. Well, it was a pleasure speaking with you. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So that was Dan Henk. Really cool guy. Really enjoyed speaking with him. All of his links, whether it's his personal website, whether it's the website for his tattoo shop, they'll all be in the show notes. Do check him out. Personal website, you're going to be able to see all of the amazing art that he's done, some of his tattoos. You'll be able to find where to pick up those books if you're into those post-apocalyptic type genre of books. Definitely recommend checking his out. If you're interested in his shop, you'll see some of that information as well. But I learned so much. I knew very little about tattooing. Probably everything I know was from some of those reality shows. And as we learned, just like any other reality show, they're not always necessarily completely accurate. So I appreciated him kind of breaking things down for me, someone who has 0 tattoos. So I learned a lot, and I think I hope you enjoyed it as well. Hope you learned something. Maybe it just kind of solidifies what you already know. But I always like talking to these people that are in these interesting professions. Maybe this is one that's a little more common than being a ballet dancer or an Irish dancer, but it's still something that just amazing, and it's still something that takes a ton of practice and a ton of skill to truly master. So Dan was an amazing person to walk me through that world. I really appreciate that. Like I said, do give him some love with all that social media and the book. Of course, if you're not already, go follow us on Instagram, Not Enough Podcast. Leave us that 5-star review on Spotify and Apple. Write a review on Apple. That's always amazing too. But I appreciate you being here. If you do nothing else, catch us next week. And thanks for being here again. Take it away, Chris.
This has been Not in a Huff with Jackson Huff. Thank you for listening. Be sure to join us next time, where we will interview another amazing guest who is sure to make you laugh or make you think. Or, hey, maybe even both. But until then, keep being awesome.